Okay, let's get straight into the class. I hope you are doing well. Today we'll be looking at procurement, materials management, and logistics. Please, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, please, we can.
Also, okay. So for as procurement people, um, we know this is basically like the entire or maybe the context of what we normally do in the purchases, and then it is it is materials and we purchase, and in keeping these materials is basically keeping it in a warehouse, and then the logistics bit has got to do with the movement of that good or that raw material from source to final consumption. To realize this is basically like supply chain in one, the procurement, materials management, and logistics. So we've already explained what procurement is in our previous, course, in our previous discussions. We mentioned that the process of obtaining inputs in uh, solving or is the process of acquiring goods, works, and services to satisfy organizational needs. So we have already, I mean, explained this in a more strategic way. But then you realize that the process of obtaining input is increasingly considered in relation to supply chain. That's whole process of obtaining the raw material through adding some level of value to the final consumer is classified as, that whole thing is a supply chain. So as an issue of developing in managing flows of goods and value towards the end customer, not just as a series of one-to-one transactions or contractual relationships. So you realize that, I mean, procurement has transcended from just making purchases on one's accord or just making purchases because I need a particular product, but then it has moved from that through to the acquisition of goods to adding value to it to the final consumer. So that's just about it. So procurement specialists now commonly take the responsibility for many matters which go beyond the traditional activities of just buying and contacting administration. So in particular, a more holistic view of supply chain has emphasized the need to break down functional boundaries and barriers so that materials related activities can be integrated within a single management framework. So the whole point of this thing is that procurement activities has moved from just as I mentioned earlier, just purchasing or just acquiring goods, works, and services. Now it has got to do with how organizations pick or choose supplies, appropriate supplies that can provide them with the things they need, and then how these organizations add some level of value to it, how these organizations or how these procurement firms manage or handle these materials they've acquired, and then they add value to it for the final consumer. And then how does these materials get to the final consumer? Through a system or through a logistic system. And that is where uh, or that is what we will be doing today, in a sense. So we move to materials management. So materials management has been identified as the total of all those tasks, functions, and activities routines which concern the transfer of external materials and services into organization and administration of the same until they are consumed or used in the process of production, operations, or sales. So the whole point is the materials or the this for so for lack of better words, we use raw materials for every material, but then realize that some may be components and parts and all that. But let's focus on the material. So the raw materials management has got to do with when we identify these raw materials, the things that we add to it, the cars that we use in collecting these raw materials. When these raw materials hit the organization or the warehouse, the value we add to it, adding processes, having to even keep it in certain room temperatures before we can add value to it, and then packaging these things for final consumption is what we mean by materials management. It's basically managing inventory within your supply chain space. Basically, that. So materials management may therefore include some key activities such as So materials and inventory planning, which normally talks about budgeting, product research and development, material specification, and planning quantities to be purchased. So basically, for the materials and inventory planning, it's got to do with how many or how much of that item do we need, where are we getting it, how much are we buying it, and then which type do we need that comes with the specifications and all that. And then we move to procurement of the necessary materials, so which also talks about the parts and supplies, the processing requisition, supply market research, sourcing, negotiation, and contract award, and then what we call the purchase to pay cycle. So for the procurement of the necessary materials is basically the purchases of the item that are needed and not necessarily wanted. So, for example, we need our organization is into fruit juice production. We need to produce these fruit juice to the final consumers. So there's the need for us to get um, um, juice makers. There's the need for us to get machines that can mill these juice. There's the need for us to have even a transportation system where we can get these raw materials or these raw fruits from the farms to our warehouse. So that's is for the procurement of the necessary materials. Then we look at storage and inventory management as well. So for storage and inventory management, it also talks about warehousing, locations, designs, how we store the inwards or the things, or I mean what we call the um, the items that we receive within the organization. So like the inputs, the things that we are receiving. So in a raw materials state, storage and inventory management is basically how we manage the raw materials or the inventory or the stock as they come within the organization. So that's basically the inputs or what we call the inbound logistics, the items that are brought within the organization, how we unload it, how we package it, how we build it in the warehouse, how we cater for it until it moves or until value is added to it, then it moves to the final consumer. So the advantages of coordinating materials related activities in a single management frame can be summarized as cost relating to material flows as isolated, enabling material managers to identify areas where costs are and concerns where costs are a concern and to take remedial action. So the whole point of material management is to reduce costs. So when you look at it, realize that it is all about cost reduction, trying to know areas of problems and then solving these problems to reduce costs. The whole point of material management is you are taking care of the materials we have. If you are into juice production, you are taking care of the pineapples, the orange, the watermelons we have using the appropriate means, whether freezing, whether drying, and all that. If we are into automobile, it is basically taking care of these materials or these automobiles as appropriate, basically that. And also, as part of the advantages, you look at the cross-functional cooperations and coordinations are improved by shared goals and management, emphasizing on the horizontal flow of material information rather than separate silos of responsibility. So for the material flow, we realize that there's that coordination among the receiving end, the dispatching end, the warehousing managers, and then other departments. So for example, in the purchase of that material, the procurement are going to make the purchases, finance are going to make payments, accounting is going to record and report these ones, and then also when it comes to the products that we procurement made purchase, when it comes to the warehouse, that's where warehousing managers together with the people at the receiving point and then the dispatching point. There's that coordination, everybody knows their role they are playing, and then that works hand in hand. So that's cross-functional cooperations and coordinations. There's also conflicting objectives can be reconciled or trade-offs made in the best interest of the process as a whole. So for example, the purchasing goal of achieving economies of scale might conflict with store's goal of minimizing inventory. So you realize that for the or the purchases. Our point is that we want to buy in bulk. Realize economies of scale is basically the benefits we derive in making bulk purchases to reduce some costs. So as purchasers, we may want to buy more, but then as warehouse managers, they may want to reduce the intake of the things they are, I mean, the intake of materials. So they will also want to reduce inventory levels or prevent holding inventory. So that's basically how this whole thing works. So that's the conflicting objectives can be reconciled. When we manage materials well, we know exactly the optimal amount of material we need, and that the finance people can make purchases as appropriate. Then we come to logistics. So the concept of logistics management takes integration a step further by integrating responsibility for both the input phase and the output phase. This is basically the flow of goods from inward to outward, or the flow of goods outward to their customers. So the whole point is that from inward, how the organization added value to these raw materials, or these materials we are handling, how these raw materials can, or these finished products can get to the consumers or the final customer, is what we call or in I mean the system with which these items can get through the final consumer is what we call the logistics. Logistics, on the other hand, can also be seen as items, or the level. I mean, in plain English terms, when people say logistics, all that they are trying to say is that the resources we need for a particular um, production, or for a particular process. But then in our case as supply chain people, it is mainly got to do with the movement of the finished products, or the flow of raw materials from inward to through to the outward of the organization. So how goods or how finished products can be sent to the final consumers. So there's also what we call the increasing supply chain integration. So there's the need for supply chains to be integrated. By integration, what that we are trying to say is that there should be that coherence and coordination among supply chains, or among actors of the chains. So many writers have surveyed the development or evolution of the procurement function, and several of them have identified that supply chain integration is a key dimension of change. I mean, supply chains, when we talk about integration, collaboration, these are items of change that we, we prioritize as supply chain people. So the purchasing performance, for example, improving purchasing performance charts the changing focus of purchasing as it evolves from a purely clerical routine activity to a commercial stage in which the emphasis is on the cost savings, and um, finally, a proactive strategy function concerned with materials and logistics management. So the whole point is that we have the clerical and the commercial activity when it comes to integration, or when it comes to improving on the purchasing performance. So purchasing is perceived as a low-ranking routine function characterized by focus on internal performance and efficiencies, while the commercial bit also focus on the shift of to price or cost saving, obtained mainly through the interface with suppliers. So this stage is characterized by adversarial relationship with adversarial relationship with suppliers, and the exploitation of short-term tactical advantage. So when it comes to integration, or when it comes to supply chains being integrated and coordinated, these are some of the things they focus on, or these are some proactive strategies they use. One of them is the clerical or transaction, where purchasing is perceived as a low, ranking routine function. In the purchase, we don't really see that as a big deal. It's a transactional thing. We just walk to the market and make purchases, or we request for quotations and we make purchases, and that's just about it. But then for the commercial, the focus is on price and cost saving. So that's one. The purchasing activity is seen as a very commercial activity that can make and unmake an organization. So in here, the focus is on price and cost saving. That's where there are a lot of background checks. We want to know how much that thing is. Do we stand a chance of getting a better price elsewhere, and all that? Then we come to the last one, which talks about the strategic or the proactive phase, or the proactive strategic or proactive relation as well. So this focuses on the effective contribution to competitive advantage. Strategies are introduced to improve the performance of external supply chains through a more holistic approach to logistics or supply chain management. So basically, that's the strategic bits of the supply chain integration. So for the strategic bit, it focuses on an effective contribution and competitive advantage, and that is mainly done by the top level managers um, or the uh, top level functional managers who wants to build some level of high relationship with suppliers or with other actors of the chain to create some level of um, supply chain integration. Please, are you with me? Any questions? Okay. So if there are no okay, if there are no questions, then we continue. So now we look at what supply chain is. So what is a supply chain? This one I'm asking you. All of you are supply chain experts. So what is supply chain? Hello, anyone? Okay. Felicia.
Yeah. So, supply chain is the process of how product and services is made available to a customer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other? There were some few hands as well. Daniel, I saw your hand.
Okay, sir. So what I can say of supply chain is that the distribution of products into the or to the hands of the consumers or a supplier. So making products available, yes, and then making sure they reach the consumers or the customers safely.
Okay. Yeah, partner.
Supply chain simply covers everything from, let's say, from raw materials through to production, then storage, distribution, and then straight to the customer.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, oh, there was another hand. Of- There was another hand. Is it Justin or Justice?
Yeah. So just as supply chain is the means of supply chain is the means of
Hello,
making
Justice. We can
something
hear you. I can
available
hear you.
often. Hello, sir.
Yeah, Justin. Please come again. I can't hear you.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, supply chain is the means of making goods and services or goods often available for consumers or buyers.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that. So realize that supply chain is basically the act of providing something or making something available, often in response to um, consumers' requirements. So it's basically satisfying consumer needs, and then it is that process or the the line with which the product or the consumer, I mean the particular product for the consumers travels from point of source to the point of consumption is basically what supply chain talks about. associated with the flow and transformation of goods from raw material stage through to end user stage, as well as associated information flows. Yeah, so in supply chain, there are three flows. There's monetary flow, there's information flow, and there's material flow. So whilst the materials are moving from the source to the final consumer, monetary flow is moving from the final consumer to the source, and then the information flow are moving in both directions. So the supply chain includes all those involved in organizing, converting materials through the input stage, through the conversion phase, and then the output phase. Basically, that's what supply chain is. So the two-way nature flows of the materials highlighted by Hartfield and Nicholas should also be emphasized, as I've mentioned. So in a supply chain, we have the upstream and the downstream. The upstream is where goods, or from the supplier's point of view or from the source. And then the downstream is the customer's point of view. So for the upstream is where the source of the particular products are derived, and then some form of value is added to it, and then it moves to the final consumer, which is the downstream. So we have interbusiness supply chain and internal supply chain. So for interbusiness supply chains, is basically the kind that focuses on buyer-supplier exchanges. That normally happens within a context of lengthier supply processes. So for example, an extractor or a producer of raw materials to a supplier or a processing plant supplies to a manufacturing assembly, and then which supplies to a distributor or a retailer, which also supplies to a consumer. So that's the interbusiness supply chains. So here is basically how we get things like Milo. Let's say Milo will be produced by Nestle Ghana in their warehouse. Then it will then travel from Nestle Ghana to maybe a certain depot, and then that depot is owned by another person, and that is also an interbusiness discussion, an interbusiness relation. Then it moves from that depot to, let's say, a small logistics organization that moves that item, and then it comes to maybe a warehouse in a certain place. Then the warehouse, other retail shops also go to these warehouse to buy from them, and then at the end it will come to a shop where we also get some of these items to use. So that is the interfirm business or interfirm supply chain. Is mainly linked with sequence of contributors in different firms, or sequence of actors in different firms. Then we come to the internal supply chain, which is also for procurement professionals to realize that the supply chain concept can be applied within organizations as well as between them. So the internal supply chains or the value chains describe a similar flow of information and other resources within and through a given organization. So from inbound activity to the outbound activity can still be classified as an internal supply chain. So for example, in your organizations, you receive raw materials. Then the raw materials are received by the warehouse. Then maybe there's some level of value addition to that raw material or the fruits. When they receive the raw material, they check everything and then they move it to the plant. Then after that, it is sent to when value is added, it is sent to the packaging unit. After that, the packaging unit would also then move it to the logistics people for them to distribute. And that in itself is likely to be an internal supply chain. On the other hand, you can also have other organizations or other functional departments needing items within the organization where the procurement function purchase for them. So for example, finance department has a problem with their air conditioning in the office. When you purchase the air conditioner as a procurement function and then you deliver to the finance department, that can also be classified as an internal supply chain. So now, what is the supply chain network? It basically describes the flow and movement of materials and information by linking organizations together to serve the end customer. So it's basically like a pictorial view or a network diagram, which shows the flows of materials from one actor to the other until it gets to the final consumer. So a supply chain network shows the links between organizations and how information and material flows between these links. Basically, that the more details the supply chain network, the more complex and web-like the network becomes. So if your supply chain has a lot of details, oh, this one will be given to that, then they come back to this, then it moves to that. The more we have that detail, the more supply chains are likely to be a complex one. So seeing the supply chain as a network is helpful for a number of reasons. So why should we see supply chains as network? It's a more strategic model for mapping and analyzing supply chain relationships. Yes, it serves as a model for us to know when we want to map the relationship among actors of the chain. Also, it raises the possibility of wide range of collaborations. Yes, it gives that level of visibility. We get to know that, oh, this is the entire chain. And then if I want to do well in this angle, this is the person I should rather look at or work with. And that is the giving possibility for wider collaborations. You also recognize the potential of extended enterprises and virtual organization, extending strategic capabilities of the firm through collective resources and performance of network contributors. Yeah, so it also helps to know, or it gives some level of extended enterprises the ability for them to also collaborate and work, shared resources and work with other network contributors. So that's it for the advantages or the reasons why there's the need for us to have a network of supply chains or a network of chains. So structuring the supply chain, well, we have what we call the tiers of supply chain. So what is a tier? So tiers are basically your supplier, and then your supplier, where you get what and where they get what they get for you. Basically, that's it. So an important strategic issue facing supply chain organizations is the structure of their chain. So the structure. Remember, we are talking about networks or supply chains being a network. So in that network, there's that structure. We know this one gets what she gets from here, and then she delivers to this one, and then it moves from that person to that one until it gets to the final consumer. So basically, that's it. One such is easily illustrated. So suppose that a manufacturer wishes to maximize his own part of the value adding process by taking in only a minimum contribution from outside suppliers. For example, the manufacturer buys in parts from a number of suppliers and assembles them through a number of stages before the finished product is completed. The structure of the supply chain in such a case is illustrated below. So realize that the manufacturing organization that buys from these plenty suppliers, when you look at it, these are the suppliers that the organization is likely to buy from: A, B, C, D, E, and then it will be sent to the top level purchaser. So for drivers of tiering suppliers, it might include any of the following. The original equipment manufacturer wants to develop long-term relationship with key suppliers, but only has the time and resource to develop a limited number of such relationships. So the whole point or things that drive tiering in supply chains is that I may want to know everybody, but the point is I can't know everybody. So let me work directly with a course rep, and then the course rep will also feed me information the class feeds in. So basically that's how supplier tiering is. Let me work with this close supplier here. If I need plenty, they would also contact their suppliers, and basically that's how the tiering works. There's also the need for standardization. So when standardization of parts and variety reduction has reduced the number of parts required, so that the original equipment manufacturer needs fewer suppliers than in the past. So sometimes want to standardize things and reduce variety. So we deal in having what we call the tiers of supply. So some benefits of tiering or supplier tiering. The the original equipment manufacturer has fewer commercial relationships to manage and can direct its attention to improving these key relationships. So the whole point of or the one of the benefits of tiering supply is that you don't have to work with everybody. You don't have to know everybody. You just work with just one or two suppliers, and then they will also fetch the others through their connections for you. And then the original equipment manufacturer can have strategic focus without having to worry so much about the transactional and operational details. Yes. So if they are focused on only one or the nearest supplier, they can then focus on other equally important things and leave the other tiers of suppliers to, that particular supplier, that reports directly to them. So with that said, we move to what we call the supply base optimization. So supply base optimization is basically how an organization rationalizes their supply base. So you see organizations have a very bigger or larger supplier base. So at some point, you may not need every supplier. So the supply base optimization is where you then cut down or you actually add more depending on the supply base optimal level. Yes. So the whole point of the supply base optimization is that the vendors or the suppliers that supply with the item you need, you are likely to cut down or increase their number, and that is the supplier base optimization. So this enables firms to control the procurement cost. So sometimes they are there, but they are not doing anything. You may want to cut down cost. Also, it helps in exploit the added value potential of concentrating on more collaborative relationships with fewer suppliers. Yeah, so you also help in creating some value-added relationships. And then we also have it helps in avoiding waste. Yeah, so people say the more the merrier, but sometimes two is a crowd. You realize that if there are too many, you can waste money on having to even develop such suppliers. So it helps in avoiding waste as well. So that's it for supplier base optimization. Please, at this point, is there any question? Is there any question? Okay. If there are no questions, then we move to from procurement to supply chain management. So you realize that the whole point of the aspect of purchasing and procurement is concerned with rationalizing the supplier base and selecting, coordinating, and appraising the performance of these potential suppliers where appropriate. But then in procurement literature, we have the term supply chain management, and it's often used both in a specific technical sense and then in a more loose and general sense. So in the specific technical sense, it's basically when supply chain is used in a modern strategic approach to supply network relationships, as we mentioned earlier. That's when supply chain as a concept or as a term is used in a more technical sense. But then also it can also be used in a loose and general sense to refer to the role of procurement function in managing no transactions but suppliers and supply activity or supply chain activity. So this is the sense in which it may be given the name supply chain function instead of procurement function. So you realize that I mentioned last week that procurement function is basically the activities that department or that procurement department takes charge in the acquisition of goods, works, and services. And then when we talk about supply chains in a more specific and technical way, all that we are trying to say that is a modern strategic approach by having that network of relationships that organizations or other firms can track. But then in a more loose sense, all that we are talking about is that it refers to a role of procurement function in managing transactions, but supplies and supply chain activity. So where this is just about identifying the actors of the supply chain and knowing where they they relate or where they are likely to make their purchases or who they are likely to deal with. That's just about it for the supply chain management in these two folds. So let's look at the drivers of supply chain management. What are the things that drives supply chain management? One of the things is what we call the cost pressure. So there's the need to reduce inventory costs. So organizations are handbound now to employ supply chain activities to find ways and means to reduce such costs. And then we have time pressures. I mean, the need for faster and more customized delivery. Sometimes you want to finish or you want to do things faster. Then there's also response pressure. When your competitors or other people are doing things, you may want to also come in to respond. And then we have the transparency pressure. And that's one of my favorites. When you have to show that indeed all the activities that engage in your procurement and supply chain activities are ethical and are appropriate to be done. So you show that level of transparency. Through that transparency pressure, now supply chain management activities are being upheld. And then also the globalization pressure, where the entire globe, people say the world is a global village. Now the entire globe is moving faster. People are coming in with a whole grade of business ideas and all that. So there's the need to coordinate with multiple and complex supply chain networks to be able to stay up to date. So what are some potential benefits of supply chain management approach? So we realize that supply chain is basically having that that flow of that flow of materials from consumption or from source to consumption. And in here, as part of the potential benefits of supply chains, one of the things is that it helps to reduce cost by eliminating waste activities and implementing cost reduction program. And then the next one is that to improve responsiveness to customers or improve responsiveness to customer requirements. Anytime customers are satisfied, then we are likely to link that to supply chain management approaches. And also assess complementary resources and capabilities. So we here, they assess complementary resources and capabilities by joint investment in research and development, technology sharing, and idea sharing, and so on. So basically, these are some benefits of supply chain management you can look at. So in developing, okay, Felicia, your hand is up. Felicia, your hand is up. Kindly unmute and talk. Or is a mistake? Hello, Felicia. Okay, so maybe it's a hand that just tapped on it. So developing supply chain management, there's supply chain management consists primarily of these things: integration or having some form of integrated relationships, collaboration, and also, yes, having that coordination among the actors. So as So the whole approach or the whole supply chain approach can take the form of any of these. Well, we have the information exchange. Realize it's just about sharing information and then using that information shared appropriately. And then there's also operational linkages where we have e-procurement links and just-in-time arrangements. And then also cooperative definitions of norms and expectations. And lastly, there's that relationship specific adaptation So realize that for supply chain, there's the need to develop some level of relationships or have some specific adaptations, having joint projects and investments together and all that. Now let's look at stakeholders of a procurement or stakeholders of procurement and supply chain function. Who are stakeholders to the class? Hello, who are stakeholders?
Hello, sir. Stakeholders are stakeholders are the people involved in the procurement or the, let's say, the procurement supply chain process. So from the acquisition of the raw materials from site to the to the customer. So they are all stakeholders.
Okay, so I want who stakeholders are. So like you've explained to me who they are, but then I wanted to know in just about 2 lines who stakeholders are.
So let's say farmers, people who produce raw materials. So let's can use these farmers as a stakeholder.
Mm-hmm.
Our buyers.
Okay, so stakeholders are individuals. Okay, thank you, John. Oh, the other hands, there's Zainab, there's Kwabena. So Johan, thank you. Or was it Kwabena that spoke?
It's Johan, sir.
Johan, yeah, I know the voice. Johan, thank you. There's so Kwabena.
Okay, so basically, stakeholders are people, right, that have interests in. Sorry, let me take the stakeholders are people or groups that have an interest in activities and performance of an organization or a project.
Okay, so individuals that have interest in any activity of the organization or the project. Thank you. Zainab, after that, Daniel will come in.
Stakeholders are individuals or group of people that are make decisions regarding goods in the company and are also affected by the decision and outcome of the decisions they make in the company.
Okay. Daniel, you add yours and then we can continue. Hello, Daniel. Okay, so if Daniel is not around, we can Sakina, you can also come in.
Stakeholders are people or group that have an interest in, like, for instance, the decision making of the company, they are being affected, and also the project of their organization. They can have influence when it comes to the project of the organization.
Exactly. Okay, thank you. So stakeholders of a company are individuals or group that are either harmed by or benefited from the company and whose rights can be violated or have to be respected by the company. So the whole point is that stakeholders are people that can either be affected or affect the organization, people of interest in organizational activities. So stakeholders form an important part of the procurement context for these reasons. They may seek to influence the organization if they perceive that the interests are threatened. So you realize stakeholders are people that can influence the organization on the direction or the tool it takes. So there are strong public and regulatory pressures for business organizations to be socially responsible, taking into account the wider social and environmental impacts of their activities. So stakeholders are also important because when it comes to supply chain activities, organizations are forced to be, to respect some regulatory issues when it comes to social and then environmental issues as well as ethical issues. So there's a need to have that, or there's a need to produce responsibly in order to meet stakeholder expectations. And then there's also organizations themselves increasingly follow and publicize ethical and corporate social responsibilities frameworks, acknowledging their responsibility not to trample on stakeholders' interests. Yes. To realize that in a typical mining firm, the town in which the mining firm is situated is a stakeholder in that mining organization. That's why sometimes you hear them building schools, giving scholarships, and even giving employment opportunities quotas for such people in such areas. So there are some categories of stakeholders. We have the internal stakeholders, we have the connected stakeholders, and we have the external or secondary stakeholders. So for the internal stakeholders, it normally comes in with the stakeholders or with the people that are within the organization. So internal stakeholders, we may have managers, we may have staff, employees, and all that. All these people, senior management, supply chain functions, managers, staff, and other functional unit heads, or other functional units employees are all internal stakeholders, people that operates within the boundaries of the organization. And then the connected stakeholders have a direct legal and contractual or commercial dealings with the organization. They include shareholders, the owners, or other financiers such as banks, customers, consumers, suppliers, and distributors. So those are also called the connected stakeholders. Banks, people that they may be affected by the actions of the organization. Then we come to the external or secondary stakeholders. They do not have any direct contractual or commercial dealings with the organization, but have an interest in or are affected by its activity. So, for example, is the government and regulatory bodies, professional bodies, and trade unions. All of these people are part of the stakeholders. So, governmental bodies are extended or secondary stakeholders. Consumers and the general public, the banks, are connected stakeholders. And then for the internal stakeholders is the ones that's happening within the boundaries of the organization. So the supplier as a stakeholder. So realize suppliers as stakeholders are likely to fall within the connected stakeholders. Okay. Now let's look at the external suppliers. So suppliers are stakeholders. So the main external focus of procurement stakeholder management activity is likely to be an external supplier or an external collaborator. So the whole point is that our suppliers are mainly often, or they are often mainly external or people outside the boundaries of the organizations who have a key stake in any procurement exercise and are subject to the purchaser's key social responsibilities. So for external collaborators, such as our source service providers, research consultants, and then legal advisors and so on. So basically that's the external collaborators or external suppliers or external stakeholders. That is just about it. So now let's look at high quality, motivated, and committed suppliers have the potential to contribute significant added value in areas such as the following. So suppliers that are high value and then are committed are likely to contribute towards the delivery of a product. They're also the new product development and process innovation in bringing up new products or innovate the already existing ones. We also have when the suppliers are committed and they put in their work, there's also the need to show for quality. And then in quality, you people also enjoy what we call value for money. And at the end of the day, a service may be rendered, and this service is likely to be. Then we move to corporate social responsibility. This is a concept that we are almost all familiar with, right? So please, anyone to help us, how do you understand or what do you understand by corporate social responsibility? Anyone? Corporate social responsibility. I'm sure you have heard of it in other courses as well. Felicia, your hand is up. Johan, you can
Yeah.
speak.
Oh, yes, sir. Okay. So corporate social responsibility is organization giving back to the community or um, for example, an organization, a mining company that is in the maybe a forest area. So giving back to the community, building hospitals or clinic
Okay,
to yes to support the community. So giving
okay,
back to the community.
okay. So corporate social responsibility is a concept that stems from how organizations sort of give back to the stakeholders within the, or gives back to the stakeholders. So the concept emphasizes the need for cooperation to take into or the need for corporations to take into account the interest of secondary stakeholder groups, and then there are important issues which may face an organization as it formulates policies about how it interacts with its various stakeholders in an ethical and responsible way or and sustainable way. To realize that it is only about giving back to the secondary stakeholders and not necessarily the connected or the um, not the connected and the internal stakeholders. So corporate social responsibility means the commitment to systematic consideration of the environmental, social, and cultural aspects of organizational operations. So realize that organizations are pressured, are bound to exhibit some level of behavior, and that is to respect the environment, relying on the sustainability stuff, respect the environment, have a social respect as well, and then the cultural aspect of organizational operations. So that thing forces organizations to now produce in that regard, and that is what we mean by the corporate social responsibility. So that we will be known as a firm that honors their promise. So for corporate social responsibility, it means the commitment to systematic consideration of the environment, social, and cultural aspects of an organization's operations. This includes the key issues of sustainability, human rights, labor, and community relations, as well as supplier and customer relations beyond legal obligation. So the objective is to create a long-term business value and contribute to improving the social condition of some people affected by our operations. So that's it. So for the social responsibility objectives, we have the, which is also a dimension of the corporate social responsibility. Although corporate and procurement objectives may primarily be financial, especially in the private sector, many firms now set social responsibility as well in relation to matters such as sustainability issues, conserving the world's limited natural resources, in also matters such as specifying green materials, controlling pollution and managing waste, and then avoiding environmental disfigurement or degradation. And then also there's also the need for ethical business relationships and development. So for the environment, it talks about our where we live and how we can save the environment. And then for the social, it talks about labor issues, um, fair trade issues, and all that, where these opportunities are uh, uh, or where these opportunities serve as a lever to organizations as practicing corporate social responsibility. We also have the ethical trading, where I mean employees, suppliers, and all that are asked to give some level of good pricing, some level of quality products without having to produce defective ones as well. And then we also have the legislative requirements. So based on the corporate the social responsibility, we also have the legislative requirement, which includes an employer's duty to provide safety and healthy environment or workplace environment for the people. So that's also the legislative requirement. Then we have the regulatory requirements, including, for example, those laid down by the specific industry regulators, such as Ofcom for the communities, for the communication industries, and then the competition or competing commissions. So for regulatory requirements, we also realize that for organizations like Ghana Standard Authority and all that, they would request that your products are of, or your products have met every regulatory requirement to be able to sell or operate in this country. And then we also have the professional codes and practice. So based on our professional backgrounds, we are likely to also have these codes, these guiding principles that affect whatever organizations or even individuals do. And all these come together to serve as a corporate social responsibility. Then we have environmental responsibility. So areas of environmental concerns in which procurement staff have a role to play. So for areas of environmental concerns, we always talk about recycling, reusing, and then repurposing. So on issues of waste, we are likely to recycle them, and then also for safe disposal of waste products that cannot be recycled. So realize that disposing indiscriminately have an effect on our environment. And that is why the environmental responsibility under the corporate social responsibility is focused on safe disposal, recycling, reusing, and repurposing, as well as selecting suppliers that are directly linked with such initiatives. So if you are giving a contract, you should give it to one that focuses on such policies and such, product selection, some policies, and um, select the suppliers that are related with these environmental policies. Then we also have safe and animal-friendly testing of products and materials. Yes, so for animals, you may want to protect the animal life as well. That is also something that the environmental sustainability under the corporate social responsibility looks at. And then also climate change, waste, as well as sustainable raw materials. Some resources that we have are non-renewable. So if we are using them, then we should use them in moderation, just so we will not have to waste or make some resources go extinct. Basically, that's. Then lastly, we look at what we call the stakeholder management. And so we've mentioned what stakeholders, who stakeholders are, what they do, the things that they are interested in. And now we look at how we manage stakeholder management, or how we manage stakeholders. Because stakeholders may have an interest in the things we do, or may have an interest in the or an influence in the organization, there's the need for us to know which of the stakeholders will some level of power to do what is so important. So, for example, between the stakeholder employee and then the stakeholder management, which one would you respond to quickly? Between the stakeholder community and then the stakeholder government, which one would you, respond quickly to? Basically, that's what stakeholder management is talking about. So we take their interest and likely response into account, and then also we communicate effectively with them on matters that can affect them, and then also manage their potential issues and problems areas that might arouse resistance. And lastly, engage the interest, support the commitment of influential groups. So stakeholder management recognizes the need to take stakeholders into account when formulating and communicating plans. So this may be helpful to procurement or supply chain functions in several ways. So it helps in or it enables it to gain expert input from stakeholders at the planning stage of a particular project. So before every organization or before every procurement of a specific project or good work and service, there's the need to integrate stakeholder uh, into the particular process. So stakeholders are more likely to buy into or support plans to which they have had inputs. This will make ongoing collaborations easier. So basically that's it. So stakeholder position analysis. So with this, it looks as how helpful it is to map the internal and external stakeholders according to their support for or opposition of a procurement proposal. So let's say we want to buy 15 cars for all functional leaders or functional managers. It is the issue or it is the duty of some stakeholders to either oppose this or accept some of these things. So Egan in his work also divides stakeholders into in a change or proposal into 9 distinct groups, and in relation to the leader or agent of a group. So he says that some stakeholders are partners, so they are the ones who support you. Others are also allies. Those who also support you and give some level of encouragement. Others are also fellow travelers, so they are passive supporters who are committed to the agenda, but not the change agent personality. So they just want to tag along and then work to get the agenda done. We also have the bedfellows. So the bedfellows are the people who support the agenda but do not know or trust the change agent. So they're like, oh, this thing is good, but I don't think you can accomplish that. We also have the fence sitters, those whose allegiance are not yet clear. They are just indifferent. They are just sitting on the fence. And then we have the loose cannons, people who may vote either way or on agenda in which they have no direct stake. So the loose cannons, they are just there for the voting, or they are just there in a meeting to close. So they are just there. Once you give out, like for those who want to vote for this, they will just vote without any specific reason. And then we have the opponents, people who oppose the agenda but do but not the change agents personally. So for the opponents, they are against the agenda, what we want to do, and not necessarily the leader or who is proposing that. And then we have the adversaries, people who oppose the change agents and the agenda. So for the adversaries, they are opposing the entire idea as well as the agents as well. And then we have the voiceless. They are silent stakeholders who are affected by the agenda but lacks advocates or power to influence such decisions. And some of these voiceless is the future leaders or the younger generation. Because if we are taking any decision, we may not call them. But when we get to a certain point, you realize that these voiceless will also come and then have a voice. And they will either be partners, allies, fellow travelers, bedfellows, fence sitters, or loose cannons, or opponents. So for stakeholder relationship management, therefore, it involves gathering some level of information about the groups and their interests, and through that you establish or you prioritize these groups, and then establishing what each group stands to gain or lose. That is just about the management of the stakeholders. So let's look at stakeholder mapping, what it is. In stakeholder mapping, we call something the Mendel's power index or power matrix, and it's a useful tool for mapping stakeholders according to the two key factors: their power to influence organizations or procurement activities, and their likelihood that they will use the power, that is the strength of their motivation to do so, based on the strength of their interest in a given issue or decision. So the purpose of this uh, Mendel's power matrix is to enable procurement and supply chain functions to identify the stakeholders whose needs and expectations will be defined. So we realize that, as I mentioned, the stakeholder employee is different from the stakeholder manager. So their needs are not the same, and their needs can't be met at the same time. Then we have to identify stakeholders who will need to be informed, consulted, or involved. Yes, some of the stakeholders may need to be involved before we start. And then also, it helps to know and prioritize stakeholder interests so that the resources are utilized efficiently. So we know their interests and then share the resources efficiently for them. So for the Mendel's power matrix, this is what we have. We use their power and interest. So the interest is on the horizontal level, and then the power is on the vertical level. Here we have the quadrants to be A, B, C, and D. So with the Mendel's power matrix, if a particular stakeholder has a high power, so I think here this side should be high instead of low. So please make that correction. This side should be high. Yes. So in the Mendel's power matrix, if the stakeholders have, or if a certain stakeholder have high power, and then, so this is high power, so that is A. When they have high power and then low interest, they're likely to be in quadrant A. If they have high power and then high interest, they're likely to be in quadrant B. In that same way, if they have low power and low interest, they're likely to be in quadrant C. Then low power and high interest, they're likely to be in quadrant D. So now let's look at each quadrant. What do we do with such stakeholders? So the matrix is normally completed with regards to the stakeholder impact of a particular strategy. So the purpose is to assess whether the stakeholders' resistance is likely to inhibit the success of the strategy, or the policy, or what policy may ease the acceptance of the strategy. So with this, the stakeholders' interest and power are the two main things that we are likely to work with. So for quadrant A, it is what we call the minimal effort. When the stakeholder have high power, but then they have low interest, you give, their interest is low, but then their power is high. So you give them some level of a minimum effort. So their lack of interest and power makes them open to influence. So you are likely to influence them. So they are more likely than others to accept what they are told and followed. And then for quadrant B, in here, the stakeholders' interests are interested in the strategy but lacks the power to anything. So you realize that for quadrant B, the stakeholders have that level of interest, but then their power is low. So for quadrant B, when you look at power is low, but their interest is high. So with that one, you keep them informed. Because of the interest, you keep them informed. It's like when you are building what do you call it, a road network for a community. They may not be the one funding, That's their power may be low, but then their interest in that thing is high, so you keep them informed on that. Then you come to the box or the quadrant C. This is where you keep them satisfied. So in here, the key here is to keep the stakeholders satisfied, to avoid them gaining interest and moving the box to D. This could involve reassuring them of the outcomes of the strategy well in advance. So you're keeping them satisfied. So in here, their interest is low, and then also their power is low. So you keep them, satisfied, since they don't have any interest and they don't have any power there. Then lastly, we look at the quadrant D, which is basically keeping they are what we call the key players or the participation. In the quadrant D, they have high power, and then I think this side is wrong. It should be high power and high interest for the quadrant D as a key player. So let me get you. Yes. So with this, now let's look at it from this angle. So quadrant A, quadrant B, quadrant C, and then quadrant D. So quadrant D, the key players have high, unlike the one you have in the book. So kindly correct that. So in the book, kindly correct the highs and the lows. There's a mistake with how the highs and lows are arranged. Please, are you with me? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Hello, sir.
Yes, sir. Well, we do.
Yes, so kindly correct the book. This should be the Mendel's power matrix. So the level of interest against power. So if the interest is high, and then so you realize this is high and this is low, the power is low. So at this quadrant, this is all low. When you're talking about power, this is low power, this is high power. When you're talking about interest, this is high interest, this is low interest. So in quadrant A, we have the stakeholders' level of interest is low, and then their level of power is also low. So here you keep at minimal effort. They don't really have any interest. So you just give them some level of minimal effort and they don't have any power. But then in quadrant B, their level of interest is high, but then their power is low. So you keep them informed. Inform them on the particular thing that you are working on. And then we come to quadrant C, where their power is high and then their interest is low. So you keep them satisfied because of their power. Their interest may necessarily be low. For example, if there's a feeder rule somewhere, the interest of the president may be low, but then because the government is the one funding the project, you keep the government satisfied. Yes, and that is the satisfied bit. Then we come to the highs and the lows. Sorry, when it comes to the interest quadrant D, that is the key players. They have high interest and high power. So they are the key players, or these stakeholders are classified as key players when it comes to such projects or such deliverables. So with such stakeholders, they are classified as the key players. So basically, that is it for the supply, the Mendel's power matrix. Yes. So basically, that's it for today's class. Did you have any question?
On my side, bro.
Okay, send it, Kim.
Yeah, okay, so please, I'm from Riverview, yeah, and I want to ask, not based on the topic we learned today, but based on the presentation, I want to ask, how are we supposed to get to the names and then the groupings?
So there should be a common platform, but then also you all have my number. So every center. So I mean, let me ask this before I address this. Do we have any questions pertaining to what we did today? If there are no questions, then we can address some of these things. Isaac, you are unmuted. What are you saying? Do you have any question pertaining to what we did today?
Yes, sir. Hello, sir.
Yes, hello.
Yes, sir. This is Kumbur Pinji.
Okay.
Yes, sir. From Sunyani campus. Please, sir, what is the quadrant D?
Mm-hmm.
That is the high interest and the high power. If you can throw small light on it for me, please.
So I mentioned that their interest is high and they also have high power. So the Mendel's power
Yes, sir.
matrix looks at these two things, whether you have interest in the project and then also if your power with regards to the project is also high. And then for the reason why we call these stakeholders key players is that they have high interest in the project and they also have high power. By power, sometimes I'm likely to link that with like finances, because let's say if it's a project that we are doing, they are the ones financing the project and they also have some level of interest, high interest in the project. And that's why they are called the key players. But then when in here, you realize that the quadrant D is showing low and high. Over here, it's showing low and high, and that's why I'm saying that is wrong. So you should check that as well.
Okay, sir.
So this one is supposed to be high. Yes. Is any other question that we can talk about presentations? Okay, so for the presentations, each group. So for the groups I'm handling, I have Riverview, STU, Botek, UCC, WA, and Frafraha. Each group will then send me a word. I mean, each each course rep from each center will send me their list in a Word document. Please, I'm not talking about image. Put it in a Word document. So you create a table and then you type your names and index numbers and you put it in that Word document. You save it with, let's say, for example, you save it as procurement and supplier context, Riverview, group lists. Then you send it to me. Please, are you okay? For the various course reps, please, are we all on the same page?
Yes. Okay.
Yes, please, but I said I don't have your number,
Yes.
so I can.
And please, when you send me a message, I beg you in the name of God, introduce yourself. Let me know which center you are from. Don't just say, I'm your student from Riverview. There are a lot of students I may be handling from Riverview. Or don't just say, this is our list, or this is for the presentation. I may not know which course, I may not know uh, which which course and which level you are talking about. Okay, so just a little introduction. My name is this. I'm from this center. I am the rep. This is our groupings list for procurement context. Number 300, and that's all. So please, are you okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So
Okay.
please, if do you
Your number
does
in the
it?
comment section.
Hello. I didn't get what you said.
So somebody said you should drop your number in the comment section.
No, but you have my number already.
I think the number is on the list where the centers are.
The numbers are different numbers, or are we to take it as same?
No, you see, when you go to the list, procurement and supply context, you could see his name, Mr. Dominic Insia. Then the number is allocated. I don't know if you have that listed, but it will be shared on the platform so that you get
Yes, it was shared to all of you because it's not really safe sharing your numbers on meetings like this. Okay. So please, if there are no questions, Zainab, Zainab,
Yes, sir.
please, today is Zainab. Felicia, your hand is up.
So please, are we meeting next week Sunday?
No, please.
Okay.
Hello, please, can you mute yourself? Sandra, Sandra, can you
Sandra,
mute
mute
yourself?
yourself.
So we are not meeting next week Sunday. We would meet when you meet for the face-to-face. I think that should be in about 3 weeks time, or 2 weeks time, if I have it right. Yes. So Zainab, today is Zainab's birthday. So class, you may want to sing a happy birthday for her. Okay, so you can unmute and together we all sing happy birthday for her. Then we can call it a day.
All right.
Okay. So kindly unmute and let's all sing a happy birthday for her. 1, 2, go.
happy
Happy
Birthday
birthday.
to you.
Happy
birthday
to you.
to you. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday, happy birthday,
Happy birthday
happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday.
Yeah.
A lot of this
Yes.
voices.
Okay, so happy birthday, Zainab. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. Thank you.
God bless you. Okay. So class, enjoy your day, the rest of your day. I'll see you when I see you next time.
Okay, okay. Have a nice
Thank
day,
you.
everyone. Thank you.
All right, sir.
Please, it's not you. I was talking to someone. I'm sorry. Hmm? Not sure because I didn't. Hello. Meeting. I'm gonna be here for more.
Good morning.